All right. As late and lame as ever. We're enjoying the technical issues here. I was this close to being free of StreamYards, but they pulled me back in. Hopefully, we'll have a better system next time where I'm fully free to take control. Yeah, Alex, whenever you get that up there, see if you can share the screen or present that, and then I'll just toss it up there, which gives a test. Just as
my
a test.
God. All right. Yeah.
In the meantime, I will share my screen.
How do I screen share? Present.
Present, yeah. And there'll be one you can
Share.
could share.
Screen.
Yeah, you could do Windows or you can do the whole screen.
Okay. Let's try
All right.
sharing screen.
There we go.
All right. That's going through.
Okay, now let's see what the audio level sounds like. I'm hearing it pretty good. Go ahead and pause that, and we're gonna do the quick intro. I just want to make sure that was gonna work. I didn't listen to the audio for this video, by the way, and now that I've got the audio, it's even funnier.
Yeah, this is so ridiculous.
This is the most try-hard garbage I've ever seen. All right, so for everybody who doesn't know, today's subject is, will the EU be a superpower? Okay, will the EU be a superpower? That is the question. Because we're probably going to be very much biased against the EU being a superpower because it's sort of I think that just elicits laughs. I should go into Nashville and just start being the man on the street and asking people, do you think that the EU will be a superpower? Like if the US and the EU went to war, what do you think would happen? And I think the first thing that's going to happen is people are going to smile. And then they're going to think, and they'll be like, I think we're going to destroy them. Because I will share my screen actually in a second here, but I don't know if Europeans actually understand what they're dealing with here with the United States. So I'm going to share the Texas A&M football halftime show. Let's see if I can. Yeah, all right. Put these guys on here. I'm sorry if the audio is bad. I will do my best. Yeah, this is the one. I'll actually turn the sound off. We'll just talk over it. Yep. So I'm just going to keep these here. This is a regular-ass college in the United States. This is just a regular college in the United States. And I remember there was a note that the United States presidential inauguration did not have a lot of pageantry because Americans really don't care about politics that much. I don't think Americans think of politics as being sacred. I think they think football is more sacred in a lot of ways. All right, so I'll just go let the Texas Aggies be here in the background. I'm going to get to the good part here because they're just getting ready, tuning up, all that stuff. Let's see when they start. And you know what? I'm even going to put it at increased speed just for the fun factor. There we go. All right, 2x speed. Let's watch the Aggies go. So anyways, the United States is a big country that has a lot of takes stuff very seriously. I think we've said before on this that we're a very serious country. It's so serious that we don't really do a lot of the international dick waving stuff. But we will sink almost an entire navy for an entire country, right? Just for messing with one of our boats. That's the Iran's navy. We will absolutely go ham when we want to. And we've been going ham on behalf of Europe. The United States is like the biggest dog. It's a big barking dog. And I think it's been keeping a lot of the enemies of the West sort of scared and at bay. And if the EU has to be a superpower, the first power you project is intimidation, right? And I don't know if the EU can do it. Because this video that we saw that you put up here, if you feel free to share it again. Whatever. I just wanted to say, I just love a random ass college in the United States. Has probably got some of the most complicated parade formations that you'll see.
Well, there's an interesting through line here. I believe it's Texas A&M up there with Arizona State University is one of the major feeder colleges for the CIA. in the
Is it
United
right?
States. Yeah.
We'll get into that. We'll definitely get into that. All right. I do like watching it.
All right. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, while you pull that up, I'm just going to let this play.
Here we go. Okay, so we're actually going to start with this guy, which is an important cross comparison for Europe versus America. One thing Europeans tend not to understand, and like the American walkable cities, like high-speed rail crowd tends not to understand, is the sheer scale of America is ridiculously different.
Yes.
But let's pop over to this is a little cumbersome. Let's pop over to the video you had sent.
That's why I hate it. That's why I hate StreamYard.
It's preposterous in its pomposity.
It's pretty funny. All right, go for it. Oh, I gotta add to the stage. What the fuck is it? What the hell was that? Pause on the one that says protect. The guy that says protect, because I thought that was the funniest one. I actually screen grabbed it. Feel free to just pause it when that comes up. There we go. Yeah. Your steadfast guardian. What is that? That looks like a Russian soldier from Red Alert too. Like he's even got an AK-47 looking thing. He's got the gas blowback system on the end there or something. What the fuck? What the hell? Yeah, and the European like civilians would be picking flowers, wouldn't they? Oh my gosh, it's very funny.
Well, there's LARP is almost like it's a term that through like memetics has almost lost its meaning, but there's a few layers of ridiculous LARPing going on in this.
Yeah.
One is the sort of pretenses of militarism, which it's like you're Europe. You guys haven't had real militaries in like decades.
Yeah,
basically not since World War II, possibly with the exception of France.
I'm gonna ask Grok what soldiers they contributed to like the Desert Storm and Iraq, because that's what they'll bring up. It's like, well, we were in Iraq and Desert Storm with you guys. I was like, define you. Like, how much of you was there? Was it like 1,000 dudes? Where are they now?
But it's also worth noting that those were both kind of like fake wars, like wars with absolutely zero possibility of losing, and they're mostly just covertly resource extraction tools, and not even from like Iraq and Afghanistan, like mostly domestically, letting them convert public coffers into private liquidity. Like it's a fake war. If anyone says like, yeah, we fought in this, like, so
well, it's a fake war, and it's kind of funny because as you said, it was more or less a resource extraction war. It was exactly. It is a fake war. There's nothing at stake. They're ruining some sort of backwaters Middle Eastern country that we don't really trade with. It's not like Iraq has a lot of oil. We weren't invading like Kuwait. We weren't invading the UAE, like in the global war on terror. We invaded Iraq.
I mean, the biggest resource extraction was Afghanistan, and the U.S. keeping the opium fields that provide 97% of the world's heroin open as a matter of foreign policy for the U.S. and U.S. interests.
Like, it kind of goes to show. It kind of goes to show that maybe Europe doesn't really know how to fight any war other than the fake CIA wars. It kind of does lend credence to what you were saying before we started the stream. If you want to share that article and pop it up, but I mean,
it's a bit cumbersome to get through.
If you want to have any talking points or just talk over it, because sometimes it just helps to have like the visual on the screen and we don't actually read through it. But yeah, I'm going to check to see how many active soldiers are in the EU. There we go. I'm just asking Grok questions on my end. Yeah, what is this art style? They're trying so hard to be like Soviets or.
Yeah. It's I forget the name for it. It's something like realism. This was the one that blew me away, and this is where like the LARPing gets really, really crazy.
Oh yeah.
there's a kind of like role play fantasy about being like the resistance, like
Oh
the
yeah.
rebels in Star Wars kind of thing, or like being, you know, the romanticism of being like the French resistance, although nobody ever looks up what the French resistance did, that they killed far more French people than anything else.
Yeah.
Um, but there's this fantasy that of being the resistance, and like the, oh, I'm tread upon but I'm fighting back kind of thing, and like there's a sort of ineffectualness to it, but this fantasy like borders on the sexual in like how obsessed and weird it gets in people's psyches.
Well,
um
it's the only way they
and
can. It's the only way they can be masculine. It's
right,
the only excuse you have to be actually be a man is by
yeah,
like, resisting the man.
yeah. What I mean, I don't even know that it's being, that it's actually resisting, because there's a desire to be like persecuted also.
Yes.
Like
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it like the Slava Ukraine thing goes to the level of like, I want to be held down and fucked by Darth Hitler while I'm in my Princess Leia costume. And like
Oh yeah.
all you can, you know, it is attempting to experience some kind of power, but also like put upon this and wanting to validate powerlessness. And you see, like, when you see this in politicians and people who want to be war leaders, like, you know, the
Mm.
EU governments, it's like, whoa, your mindset, like, you are not in this for the reasons of winning wars. You are in this for like the validation of like, you know, like psychological issues that do border on the sexual.
Yeah, it is a bit of a LARPing as the battered wife, and because the
Mhm.
battered wife doesn't have to have any self control either, right? She can lash out, she can hit, she can attack anybody. She has no moral agency anymore once you become a victim to that extent, which is
Mhm.
actually the liberation that is allowable in their sort of power paradigm, right? Because if they were powerful for the
Right.
sake of powerful, then they would feel responsibility with that power. But if they're the victim, they get to just skirt all responsibility that comes with it. So, and he's got like
Right.
another video down below. The comments are very funny, by the way. If you scroll down and look at the comments, they're very funny.
Oh my god.
Well, at least they are on mine. Oh, yeah, that guy was there. Oh, he must have hid some of the replies because the first ones I got were like, "You guys are ethnically replacing your own people. How is anybody going to fight?" He
Yeah.
must have hid that one. Yeah, yeah.
No, yeah. Well, that's I mean, one of the biggest aspects of delusion here is like nobody's willing to fight for
No,
the
no.
EU. And like borderline, maybe not even willing to fight for their own countries. And you know, like, I think this is something I suggested earlier, that, you know, I would give any given European country, independent of the EU, greater odds of being a superpower than the
I see
EU
what you're saying.
itself.
Yeah, the EU is
Like,
a fake country. It's a
yeah.
fake. It's trying to be the United States almost. It's like because the United States is just a band of different states. At least it was until the Civil War, where you couldn't.
Mhm.
People actually tried to secede. You could. The sign says you can leave at any time. It's in our Constitution in the state of like Virginia, secessions in their constitution. Like you could leave at any time, and then when someone tried to leave, all hell broke loose. So it kind of proved
Right.
that the United States was not quite the United States that we thought it was. That's okay. But the United States is a weird country in that it is an amalgamation of different miniature nations. Some of them, as you've shown, are actually bigger than many of the nations, both in population and geographic area, than Europe. What holds us together, though, is that we don't actually hold together that much. It's kind of weird. I find that America is an interesting paradox in how functional it is, despite how it breaks every rule that we understand of how nations are supposed to be built.
Right.
It's very odd. Like we don't. Oh, go ahead.
I think we actually do hold together largely on the basis of an extremely beneficial social delusion, that we look around where we live, and for the most part we see people participating in the same culture, way of life, etc., and we call this American, and then we extend the label of American and project it outward, and like, oh yeah, all these other people are my countrymen in these far-flung regions of the country, and they must be like me and have my values. And they don't, except for everyone believes that.
Well, I mean, the thing of our military recruitment, a lot of it, and I've heard this criticism before that a lot of our recruitment is actually quite mercenary. It doesn't come from like this great dear love of country. It seems that it might, from what I've seen, it comes from the GI Bill wanting to change your socioeconomic, trying to go up in the world. It also comes with a tremendous amount of cultural prestige of being a veteran. Like, how much prestige do you have if you're an actual combat veteran who fought in an actual war? You get to say that all the damn time, and you get to be that all the damn time, and people will just randomly thank you at all times. It's a weird sacred class that, like Patton had said, that you're part of this new elite of Americans and the most American of the Americans. And you're not really fighting for any ethnos, really. Like, people get into the military and they don't get along. Like, if you actually went to like a boot camp or something and saw people mingling together, the recruits don't get along. They're all just sort of forced together and they have to perform a job. And there's a large thing of punishments. It's not like a European country from maybe like World War One where everyone's there to get it done, boys. We're gonna make it happen. We're all working together. It's like, no, Americans are this weird battle arena of people trying to fight each other. And I feel like our internal conflicts paradoxically make us a lot stronger as a nation, because if I'm not the best in my platoon or best in my squad, some other a-hole is going to be, and no one's going to be better than me. So you end up having people competing. It's almost this weird incentive to compete for status, and military status is considered a very high status, which is why American cohesion started falling apart a little bit during the Vietnam War, when it started losing that status, when you actually saw veterans like throwing their medals back and joining the protest movements. That post-war veneration was actually a large part of our character. In a strange way, there's multiple ways of being the best American, and that's one of them. And I think that's why people join up. I said this once to an old lady, an old boomer lady, and she got really mad because I said that I think she was saying that, oh, all of our soldiers, they're heroes, and I just said, like, a lot of them are just trying to get their student loans, and she got mad at me. And I was like, no, that's when I was trying to enlist in the Marine Corps. And I went to MEPS. I got medically rejected. I went to MEPS. I was like, this is it's like walking into the cantina in Mos Eisley, right? This is not like a bunch of patriots necessarily. I think these guys all wanted to fight. And they wanted to be the best. And America's kind of built the country on those two premises, which makes our military pretty effective when it's let off the chain to actually do its job. Europe, I don't know if they have that level of effectiveness, because right now they run off the gas tank of love of country and nationalism and ethnos and all that stuff. I mean, that's been eroded quite a bit, probably for...
Well, yeah. They've had political coalitions for decades and decades that are essentially demonizing any sort of nationalism or like love of country as I hate to retread ground, but like the post-war liberal world order and the mythology that comes from the ending of World War II, like essentially completely dominates their psyche. But it's not really World War II that did it, I don't think. Which is sort of why I'm not super interested in talking about the Hitler thing and all that. The reality is Europe is in a position where as a going European concern, and many of the constituent countries in the European Union do not seem to have a sense of vitality. A fuse flowing through it that energizes people the way many Americans do. It's like they're dying or in stasis. And I think it was World War One that did it, actually.
Yeah. Well, it was I think
World War One was a mortal blow, and the rest of the 20th century was just the continent bleeding out.
I had a post on X a little while ago about this, where I'm pretty harsh on the European guys, because I like Europe. Probably borderline admire the UK. Really, I admire England. I don't know anything about Wales or Scotland. But this post on X that I put up was probably it's a civilization rendering thought that Europeans didn't build Europe. It was the European nobles that built Europe. If the peasants and merchants were left to it, they would probably have just a bunch of German feudal warding states all fighting all the time and never really cohering. I don't know what kind of structure there would be at all. Like I think about like things of cleanliness, right? Just thinking of cleanliness, and that 300, 400 years ago, European peasants were pretty much just as filthy as modern Indians at their worst, right? Like the most extreme cases of Indians, like doing the cow feces fights and drinking the piss and all that stuff, and doing all those weird, it's like germ theory. What theory? Germs are just a theory, man. But that was in Europe a long time ago. But I think that the way that their civilization is structured is they have this noble class that more or less commands the peasants what to do. And they build the institutions. Like the academies were filled with the sons of nobles who wanted to outdo each other. Like the nobles are always competing. I have a feeling that competition and conflict is actually what builds something to an almost sacred level, right? You have to have conflict. And a lot of the conflict for let's say the Enlightenment was nobles attempting to outdo each other. They're like, oh, I've found these ancient Greek texts and I know how to read Greek. It was like, well, I'm a scientist. I've used the scientific theories here to discover this, and I'm a paleontologist and I've discovered that. It was a lot of prestige, and there was a competition for prestige. Mm-hmm. And the noble class is more or less gone. It's when World War I hit. I think they just felt so bad about how they ran Europe that they no longer wanted to, and they were so demoralized that I don't really see where the noble class of Europe is, because I see just basically lower class and middle class. And the house of, the veritable House of Lords is kind of just quiet all the time, sort of saying, well, we're conservative, we want to conserve things, but we're not really. It used to be that nobles would lead things into new directions, and that people would follow. And those are the two keys of it. Like fealty is a big part of what made that system work. And now nobles have more or less been Monty Pythoned into a joke. You'll see Stephen Fry pretty much destroy the image of what a noble would be. In Blackadder, the last and the second to last season there, and it's like, who's leading them, right? Because they're desperately wanting direction from their institutions, and the institutions are run by essentially parasites who are their middle class.
Right. So I think the decline of the aristocrats is an example of what we're experiencing, the changes moving into modernity and post-modernity. The core of it is a society is basically only as good as its elites are willing to make it, and how effectively it selects for elites, and how effectively it polices them internally for excellence. It used to be that the elites were actually a pretty static class, being hereditary landlords and positions like that. As you begin to go into the late medieval period and Renaissance, and then up through the Enlightenment and the emerging of modernity, technology and capital formation actually hits a rate where it starts to cause wealth accumulation, and therefore like power at a significantly faster rate than land holding on its own. And you change the constituent membership of elites on the basis of power as means to carry out your will, like the physical reserves necessary to effectuate a design. Opens up to a lot more people. There's a constant tension in this, like that's described in the literature all over the place, between old money and new money.
Yes.
New money is seeking legitimation, but it doesn't have refinement and so on. Old money is essentially falling behind the times because they are still carrying out this feudal style, and may actually not be as wealthy as the new money is. And you see this as major literary themes from the 15th century through the 20th century. And my inclination is like you probably are not going to see much of it as a literary theme in the 21st century, essentially because the old money culture is probably no longer relevant.
Yeah, it's now ancient money. It's history, right? It's
right. It's a historical phenomenon, not a currently existing group.
one thing I
Or at
love
least
about
not one with like strong cultural cachet.
One thing I
And so
love about him. Oh, good. Sorry.
what you
Bit of
get
delay.
is this change in who constitutes the elites, and yeah, you're right. It tends to be upstart middle class people. They're bringing a different set of values. Perhaps like they have to bring their own level of excellence, but intergenerationally, they don't necessarily have the training to have
No,
it be
yeah.
persistent.
Th-
It's the novel Shibumi, which I think I recommended last
You
time.
did,
Actually, one of the
yes.
core tensions in that is between merchant elites and warrior elites, and it's told through the eyes mostly of this old world aristocratic assassin who's like lived through World War II and is sort of one of the last living warrior elites.
Yeah, and especially as war and rule and culture become more automated, the these old classes start to fall apart, and you end up getting the merchants. And the thing is, the merchants have their own internal struggles. Like if you one thing I had a criticism of a lot of these philosophers who talk about nobles, merchants, and peasants. I was like, that's not granular enough, not even close. Because inside of the merchants, like what kind of merchants? Because there's a massive amount. Like merchants are in constant conflict, and I've got this rolling theory that yes, conflict is actually the main quality policing force. Because who's going to, unless you have a king who's above all the nobles, who's going to keep all the nobles good, right? If everyone's a peer at the very top, if all the elites are peers, well, then it's just conflict that's going to keep them good. And whether those conflicts are in, I've commissioned the best art, or I've commissioned the best music, or the best cathedrals, or the best science, or the best literature, or whatever else, well, they're going to have to compete now in head-to-head proper competition, which might get defeated by the network effect, but networks do change. But like things like Twitter being bought and then turned into X is like territory was taken. Like one elite saw that another elite was on their back foot. The elite, Elon Musk, had the backing of lots of people, other elites as well as commoners. Trump is kind of interesting, is that a lot of his fundraising was from the commoner class, which is a different type of democracy where people are voting with their wallet. But anyway, I digress. Like, where can we have our elites have conflict? That is where you're going to get the quality elites. And I don't even know how you become an elite in Europe. And what is their culture towards money, right? America has a really good relationship with money and moneyed people. I think if you're a millionaire or a billionaire in Europe, you kind of have to downplay it. You're like, oh, I'm just a person just like you and me. Whereas like if Elon Musk dressed in a golden suit and just started commanding random people and throwing $100 bills at them, Americans would probably think that's hilarious and pretty awesome. Americans like it when you drive a Maserati. Americans like it when you have a private jet, unless you're talking about, Americans hate hypocrisy. So if you're an environmentalist, we think it's awesome. Like, the entire rap industry is built on people pretending to be very, very successful monetarily and then telling you about it at length. Whereas in Europe, I think there's a certain shame of being a successful merchant, probably because they had the baggage of history of the sort of blue-blooded nobles kind of implanting into peasant class that, oh no, money is the root of all evil. Probably using the. I'm just talking out of my ass at this point, but how much did the nobles use the church to communicate anti-money sentiments? Whereas actually, it's kind of strange because in the Bible with Christ, he sang praises of those servants who could multiply what they were given, and explicitly in monetary terms. Although that was an allegory, most likely. Like, he doesn't actually want us to go and take 100 talents and turn them into 1,000. He probably wants us to take whatever talents were given to us, as in talent, not money talents, and then multiply them. But yes, the idea of that we celebrate
It's an
success.
expansive model for stewardship.
Yes, yes, you're supposed to leave it better than you got it, and that could include money. And money was not considered an evil thing, but in somewhere in European culture, it was. I saw a live, sorry, not a live stream. I saw a video by Lotus Eaters a while ago with Miles Rutledge on, and I pay attention to offhand comments and I pay attention to mannerisms and reactions. And Miles said something to the effect of like, "Yeah, people hate it when you make a little bit more than average. If you make more than the average money, they look at you like you're evil or something." And then Carl was like nodding in agreement, was like, "Yes, yes, that's true." And I was like, "Really?" Because that's the worst. And I've had this disagreement with other Englishmen because I didn't understand at the time. I was talking with one other fan of Lotus Eaters, is Russian garbage human, on private chat, and I said, "Do English people hate each other?" And he was like really confused. And now I realized once I saw what Miles was talking about, that what he was talking about is the worst thing an American could possibly do to another American, which is discourage him from being successful monetarily. That's just normal over there. Like, so we take for granted that we're like the same people. The Americans are from Europe. It's like, there's actually a lot of attitudinal differences that are crucial to our development as a civilization. And the celebration of wealth, money, especially if you came up from nothing, making all that money, or even if you're a Nepo baby, but you became the ultimate wealthy person. That's Donald Trump, right? Small loan of $1 million thing doesn't dissuade anybody in America who's reasonably minded. And the leftists in America have the most European attitudes when it comes to money. They have to basically launder all of their fundraising. And I think the EU does that too. And that might, to hook this back into what you're saying, this might be a reason why the left in America and the Europe are like in the pocket of possibly, they're open to manipulation by like the CIA or other clandestine operations.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think one thing when it comes to European culture, it's probably important to note that because the continent does have tall poppy syndrome, as does England and the UK. I think they originate in different places. For the English, it seems likely that it is an extremely high degree of consideration to for the other that sometimes gets taken to an absurd extent, like
the feelings.
It's not right to show off and make people feel inadequate, so I will downplay this. And it turns into this cultural expectation of like it's not seemly to do well. Versus the continentals very much have the liberté, égalité, fraternité kind of thing, like where it's taken to a really far extreme where it's ideologically necessary that people be equal. And this is a relatively recent idea that's very, very different from how it had been historically. I think partially there's a really good book called Why Nations Fail. Some of the US aid and CIA revelations put there's a little this story isn't really complete. But the book is essentially about nations succeeding is actually rare and failure is the normal state. Because you have to have open and inclusive markets that allow people to compete. And then you have to have a non-extractive government. And it turns out there's a lot of ways to fuck up doing those two things. You won't succeed if you don't have both of them. And the book makes the case historically, particularly in the recovery period from the Black Plague, where prior to that, England and the continent were relatively similar in economy and governmental forms. The UK became, or not the UK at the time, but England and the British Isles became significantly more economically open and less extractive in its governmental form, whereas the Europeans essentially tried pretty hard to remain extractive. And just from an economic determinism level, it created very different attitudes. That's not the whole story, like I say, but I think it's a contributing factor that can't be overlooked. and that there is a developmental strain in continental Europe that didn't really happen in the UK, that was much more like envy based and sort of results in a Rousseau or a Marx kind of thing.
Yeah. Europe kind of gave birth to Marxism, and it has always been like a place that's preserved it, right? I think if China left the China's interesting because they distorted communism, and more or less it's a command economy. It's probably closer to fascism now, where they have some free markets, but you're always under the government. You have no rights, but it's a free market as long as the government lets you. I feel like, there's a certain attitude towards this envy and fraternity, which this sort of closeness, it gives birth to a lack of individual success. So, there's a Finnish saying of like, don't be the tall nail or you'll get hit, sort of thing. Of like, in other words, don't stand out, which is why you'll have a country that has like the highest IQs in the world, and then like, what do they do with it? They're not. I don't think they're in control of much of anything. One thing that the Europeans can do is work remotely for American companies that allow them to succeed, because you can just quietly succeed in your house and no one will know. But this attitude, I don't know if it tracks unless you have a ruling class that is willing to be the exceptional ones. Because if you have a bunch of these peasants who have been conditioned to be fraternal, like we're all the same, we're all in it together, we're all going to do this nice and fairly. Like you need a bunch of like real dogs at the top who are going to say, yes, we're now going to colonize this area. We are now going to open up a company and we're going to undercut our neighbors in Austria or something like that in terms of like rubber or whatever. Yeah. We're going to make microchips, and because when you set out to make a business, you are setting out specifically to enrich yourself. There's no other reason you would start a business, because the price you pay in terms of just sanity and social isolation and risk, the massive amount of risk, it has to have an upside. And I guess this is going back a little bit before of like, why would anyone fight for Europe? There's no upside. It's just all downside. There's you get all the responsibility, and then everyone shares the results. And now they're opening up to, obviously, I try to avoid talking about migrants too much in Europe, first off, because everybody talks about it. Second off, I think it's a symptom of a much greater problem that they have. That they try to be egalitarian to a fault. Even if there were no migrants, you'd still have lazy people that you have to share all the spoils of your success with. They'll just I think particularly in like the Angela Merkel Germany case, and like it really is important to remember that Germany kind of inflicted the migrant crisis on the rest of the Europeans by allowing it to happen in the Schengen zone. And the Angela Merkel thing is like the psychology portrayed again is like a kind of ideological commitment to a weird self-destructive principle, again, to like the point where it's like, I would say religious, but again, it's like so deformed, it's more like a paraphilia in behavior, where it's like it's a sexual fetish. Oh, yeah.
And like it sounds crude, but like I have not come up with any other like psychological behavior that matches these things, other than like, this is how people get about weird sex stuff. This is not like a serious idea. This is a cognitive deformation.
Yeah, it's a fetish, and the word fetish is in like a little trinket that is takes on some sort of sacred spiritual meaning that you have for yourself. Yeah, there need to be no, you're good. Their need for egalitarianism, and the fact that they combine, like, they've eroded nationalism, so now it's all about global citizens. That actually makes a lot of sense as to why there's a big migrant crisis, because they're saying, oh, they're just like us, we should help them. And they used to help them abroad with the colonies, which I think it's very funny. I mean, it's funny as in peculiar, not necessarily funny as in amusing. The Europeans took it upon themselves to try and civilize the rest of the world, and they brag about it. I remember academic agents saying, "Oh, no one's going to love America. No one's going to miss America. It'll be the worst empire ever. Everyone's going to hate them." I was thinking to myself, is it the purpose of an empire to be loved? We just don't, tell the Americans that. Screw them. Empires have 4 purposes. Okay, first off, it's personnel reassignments. All right, wealth extraction, having a buffer state in case there's some sort of war, right? And I forget the fourth one. I have a list of them. But essentially, it's all exploitative and reassign and erodes whatever there is, right? So in trying to civilize these other people, they've more or less wasted their time. And they've gotten none of the benefits of the empire. Like, they should have... I mean, I'm not going to tell these empires what they should have done, but one of the great juxtapositions to the European-style empire is the Mongolian Empire. And I'm gonna pig Latin the word so I don't have to say it on YouTube. But like the mass ape raise of the people was actually a very important function, and Europeans cannot understand this. The massive ape raise of women implanted a massive amount of genetic code of the conquerors into the local populations. Okay, what that does is it means you ever notice there's lack of any sort of ethnic backlash to any Mongolians? People are pretty happy with Mongolians generally. What is that? Well, it's because everyone's third kid, every other kid in there is a Mongolian. And now you have those kids who are like buff and strong compared to the locals are saying they're like rooting on their grandma's ape raised, essentially. So everyone's like, yeah, I'm a bit Mongol. It's great. I'm a bit Mongol. I'm from the Hakka Chinese. They're from North China. We left in 1100 AD from our homeland to go south in China. Like we're the Mongols displaced us. Most likely there were shenanigans. I mean, they got horses. We don't have horses. Horses are fast. What are you gonna do? But it has made us. It's changed our genetic makeup, and I think for the better. Unfortunately, good things come in bad ways. That is what it is. But imagine if England had done that in India. Well, imagine if the entire Brahmin class just looked English. Like if for like 3 generations, it was like, yes, if you want guns and the crown's sponsorship, you must marry one. It wouldn't even have to be ape race. You could just be like, you have to marry one of our nobles if you would like to have all the guns and gold and gunpowder and technology and administration, so you can edge out your rivals in the area.
Right. Okay, if you just do a merging of the aristocratic classes between the two nations.
And then where would England be right now? England would probably have a massive ally, not a massive rival. By telling the Indians that you must stop burning your widows, what they did was they undermined the legitimacy of Indian rulership. No matter, good things could come in bad ways and bad things could come in good ways. What the problem is if you've had your leadership undermined, what must you do to restore your leadership? You must attack whoever did it. You must make them suffer and destroy them, really. Like in the rest of the world, wars are not won with a handshake of the 2 generals and a treaty, and we'll write a few more fife songs and we'll change the lines on the map. No, it's from the complete eradication of the race that lost.
Right.
The Japanese were...
There's something funny that happens in... Americans have no idea what a civil war looks like because our civil war was not actually a civil war. Our civil war operated exactly like a war between 2 nations. We call it a civil war, and when Americans think civil war, they think that's actually a war between 2 nations, straight up. A civil war looks like street to street fighting in Serbia. It looks like groups of neighbors killing each other. It's so scary. We have no effing idea. But there's another layer on top of that, which is Western wars look nothing like other wars generally. World War I was probably one of the first wars that started to look like older wars. Prior to the Napoleonic period and the invention of total war, the European wars were operating at a very high level of cultural technological sophistication. And if you try and analyze historical wars by looking at those wars, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You will draw completely the wrong lessons.
I'll tell you what a civil war looks like. And by the way, a civil war, this different type of civil war, the fact that they're on different levels. Right? Imagine if you're a fencer and you can only do the high stance. Well, the person who has the low stance has now an advantage over you, right? Because these other countries can operate in whatever stance they want. And the hypocrisy is pretty normal in most other countries because it's for their survival. Like there's no There's a reason why there's like very low trust societies around the world, and why people lie a lot in other parts of the world is because they've had to survive. Like this whole like Marcus Aurelius, always tell the truth, never lie, always say what you mean. That is a Western thing. And he is an emperor whose position is more or less cemented. Like for normal people all over the world, you'll notice that every other ruler who wrote a treatise, I mean, I'm only really thinking of Sun Tzu and Miyamoto Musashi, but I would venture to say boldly that most rulers throughout the rest of history have been like, oh yeah, lie all the time, deceive your enemy, like lure all the men out of the village, and then when they're on a wild goose chase, just go in and slaughter everybody who's there. It's like total. It's anyways. What a civil war really looks like is what Europe is probably about to look like.
Yes. I think they are probably going to go through civil war.
There's a real civil war. That's not even that's not even like a fun. We're making songs about a civil war. That's going to be a. They're importing the balkanization.
No, yeah. There's going to be real civil war and ethnic cleansing unless they like course correct very, very quickly. And this is kind of crazy. Their deformed psychology and learning all the wrong, like learning from history with almost too much precision when it comes to like the World War II myth and stuff. It's like you demonize all these parties that are like as like the far right, and it's like, nah, dog. These guys are your off ramp. These guys are your off ramp on your trajectory toward ethnic cleansing. They are trying to deal with the problems that you have in the nicest, most humane way possible. Get on the off ramp because you will not like the next exit.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna scale of I don't know space fiction. You know what? Space objects. I'm just gonna put this in the background here in a second as a. Yeah.
Before we move off, by the way, the longer I've looked at this frame from this video, the collection of reconstruct Europe, like what do you mean reconstruct Europe? Like, oh, you're implying that Europe is broken right now.
This is an interesting point, actually. I think I've seen this rhetoric.
It gets better. Look at the flags.
Yeah,
Turkey, Switzerland. Yep. Neither of these countries are in the EU. Like, why is Turkey at the top?
Yeah, Switzerland. They're not. Are they in NATO? Or do they stay out of NATO? And Turkey is not.
Sure Switzerland is out of like everything aside from an association with Liechtenstein.
Yeah. Let me pull this off. I'm just going to put this in as a visual cue. Like the scale. Imagine that imagine that Pluto here are the Atzines, and Hitlerhay, right? And they just keep going up. And you're going like, okay, well, this is like Serbia now. Okay, the moon's like Serbia. It's a little bit bigger. It's getting a little bit bigger. I'm just going to just fast forward this over here until it's, let's see. Until eventually you're starting to look at like, over here. There we go. That's Myanmar. Mm-hmm. There's Syria. On the scale of how bad a civil war is. Like all the third world countries, until eventually it's just galactic scale, of how bad it can get. And you're over here saying you're getting a little big. Hey, Pluto, you're getting a little bit big. And then you forget that there's that coming over. But of course, they're egalitarians and they're trying to. The moral righteousness is also what keeps them from actually making sound assessments of other countries. Because I guess maybe they got really drunk off of moral righteousness during the colonial period or something. I don't know. I'm not European. But they're drunk off it now. And it keeps them from saying like, yeah, these migrants are actually really bad. And I've actually tuned out almost all of the European and English right. Like I watch a video once a week maybe. Because they're just saying the same things over and over again for the last decades. Of like, this is really bad and it's happening. they're hypocrites. They're not really this way. Oh, they've made this. They're understating it. They're making the locals the scapegoat when it's really the foreigners. I was like, yes, they've been doing that forever. Why does it keep working?
So I think there's a couple of reasons why it keeps working. One of the things. Just returning really to a note that struck me from what you said earlier about the death of aristocracy. It used to be actually before hereditary peerage was effectively abolished in the UK, and you get a lifetime peerage. that the House of Lords, the participating members in the House of Lords actually tended to be significantly younger than the people in the House of Commons and significantly
Really?
more energetic. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Um,
It's the
because
opposite
they
today.
they essentially inherited it and they're there, they tend to be there for a long time, not
Oh.
for a good time. Versus if you want to make it up into commons, you have to make a ton of money. You have to make a ton of people happy on your way up. You have to advance through a hierarchy. This takes a great deal of time. Versus you
Mm.
inherit and you have a duty of
Oh.
stewardship forever. So you tend to be young and you tend to be younger than the people who have had to work their way through the process, because every new parliamentarian has to work their way up through this process versus lords don't.
Right, right.
So
And
it's
also,
actually an extreme difference in character. And with the abolition of, effective abolition of hereditary peers and moving to lifetime peerages, the people in the House of Lords actually tend to be political allies and beneficiaries and reflect the kind of people you see in the House of Commons, if not being, in fact, the same people
I
that you
see, I
usually
see.
see.
Well, it's also the by relying on institutions such as the noble class, which they're an institution of themselves, for truth, like the permission to speak about something that's controversial. All you have to do is make a taboo or a controversy around something, which is the reason why I think the left uses the word controversial to describe someone, is
Mhm.
that whenever they don't like them for whatever reason. This is a controversial, Rombley Tomlinson or something like that. This is the controversial Elon Musk. Despite the fact, it doesn't matter if the polls say that there's like 90% approval rate of him, which is
Mhm.
which is the least controversial you'll get in a poll.
Well,
They'll
it's
keep saying,
important because conformity is one of their highest moral virtues, and
yes, yes.
simply presenting somebody as being out of step is a moral condemnation. Not for most people, but specifically for people who share the same religious instinct.
Yeah. And the who is allowed then to dissent? Who is allowed to be controversial? Well, it was the people who were given the privilege by birth, or really the right by birthright, the nobles, who could say what they wanted to say, and maybe the other nobles will shout them down. But he's, the Earl of, I'm going to make up a title. The Earl of Sussex is always going to be the Earl of Sussex, whether or not he hates brown people. Doesn't matter. Like, he's protected and he is exalted and given some level of credence just by his title. But that is gone now. So it's like, who's going to dissent? Who is going to
Mhm.
say, who is going to be the controversial one? And I will put on the screen actually this graphic that I just saved. This is actually what anti EU pilled, and I'm going to explain to any viewers who watch this later on why I am so anti EU. Because I am deathly afraid that whatever they're smoking, we're going to start catching it. Like the whatever ideological pathogen that they have that makes them like this. Here's the number of voters for people who would have voted for Harris versus Trump. Trump is blue, Harris is orange. I didn't choose the color scheme. It is what it is. Anyways, look at this. You have to go, like, the United Kingdom is actually, let's see if I pull my folder up here. The United Kingdom is to the left. So Trump 38% in California versus United Kingdom 32% for Trump. They are to the left of California. And Americans talk about wanting to just blow up the San Andreas fault line and let California just drift into the sea. I don't want any of what they've got. There's something very dangerous going on there, and I don't fully understand it. And that is what's motivating me to talk about this with Alex Kosma for the third week straight, or the third session straight, 6 weeks really, every other week. What's going on?
So I can give you a few things. One of them is, like I said earlier, essentially elaborating on your point that society is the quality of a society is driven by its elites and how it selects those elites and then internally polices them for virtue. You get weak bad elites, you generally get a weak bad society. one of the things that's changed is the nature of elite selection. There's also ideology and stuff like that. The
Well, yes,
nature of
but
elite selection in Europe has changed significantly, partially because of their ideology and partially because of the post World War II liberal consensus. In that, in many cases, much of Europe's elite selection is actually low key done by Americans. And over about a 40-year period, 40 to 50-year period, that elite selection was done for the purposes of winning the Cold War.
correct.
America would essentially pick regimes, as like they did famously in 1948 in Italy, rigging their elections. America would pick leaders that would help it effectuate the ends that it wanted. Now America continues to be doing it without a clear adversary, or at least attempting to invent one.
Right,
And
right.
another thing that's really important also is the shape of warfare has changed over time because of you get the information warfare and information control and ideological subversion have progressed an unbelievable amount in the last 100 years. And America has moved to a model of the best way to get what we want actually is not to create firm alliances and stuff like that. It's to create a bunch of destabilized shitheads that are easy to manipulate.
Yes,
You
absolutely.
essentially ruin their culture, and it's very easy to get what you want out of them.
That's a good point.
Given that that's the case,
Yeah.
and we're no longer fighting like a reality-based enemy for foreign policy purposes anymore, the you have to understand that the ideology you see among Europe's ruling elite is the picture of like ignore everything they say, just understand that this is the purpose of foreign relations. Like the US is not the only one that does this, but we're the
Right,
dominant
right.
player, at least in the EU.
Well, this is
Their
what, yeah.
ideology is ideology that is specifically chosen because it fucks the host country up and makes them weak.
Well, every
Like,
empire does this too. Every empire, no empire makes a strong king in any of its vassals. I
yeah.
mean, empires will, and America's been. I believe that America's been an empire since the Civil War. Even in and of itself, like we were an empire. If we had no if we were totally isolationist, we'd still be an empire. It'd just be the empire of America, tyrannizing other states in America. And it's funny because right now you see the conservatives, or whoever you want to call them, the red ones on the map there, have learned this lesson: is that you need to actually destabilize and attack your enemy. The American South knows this. They've been destabilized and attacked for a long time. Funnily enough, right? Think about America up to Obama, right? Fairly united, actually. Strangely enough, fairly united, especially in recent memory, Reagan years, all that stuff. Onward, Bill Clinton, everybody loved the guy. Everyone kind of still does. We just don't like his wife. Had many such cases. Shout out to Alec Baldwin, poor guy. I feel everyone actually could feel bad for Alec Baldwin now that we've seen his wife. It's like, oh no, we feel it kind of recontextualizes why you're such a dick, or it's your punishment. Who knows? Anyways, Obama's the one that made it so that propaganda could be done in the United States, and that's when you start seeing things become really off kilter in terms of like you start seeing what's been happening to the EU probably for the entire post-war period happening in the United States.
Yeah, we're doing it ourselves. That was a remarkable thing. Like, if you ever watch those interviews with Yuri Bezmenov, I watched it. I'm like, okay, it's possible that the Soviets did destabilization, but like, I look around and like over the time period that it happened, and like, nah, nobody else did this to us. We did it to ourselves.
Oh no, we did.
We straight up destabilized our own. But there's also Obama. The Smith Modernization Act is a big part of it, enabling the foreign policy establishment to operate at home. But to some extent, they've been doing that already. It just allowed them to take the limiter off. There are a couple of other events that happen around the same time. One of the really big important ones is the housing crash and the big attendant financial crisis. One, it breaks up material circumstances really badly, exposes that America's over leveraged, and that our wealth that we were experiencing, particularly in the 2000s, was premised on like sand.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So you physically and economically destabilize people, and then you have reaction movements like the Tea Party and stuff like that. Like, the Tea Party is essentially like a fuck you establishment, fuck you existing elites.
Yes.
You have another similarly timed movement in Occupy Wall Street that the banking sector injects neo-Marxist social justice movements into as a way to destabilize and destroy them, and essentially keeps it around as its pet movement to attack left-wing populism. And like the banking sector essentially injected this from the universities into mainstream cultures as a means of destroying this movement.
Well,
So
and it's we're
these
starting
things
to
go on at once, and like we're destabilized.
And the funny thing is that what I love about America is that it does have an immune system to this, which I don't know if the Europeans have, because Americans will go off the reservation. You will have a crackpot with a newsletter, and he'll just keep going at it for decades and decades. And whether he's right or wrong, God bless him, he's willing to be a complete pariah. Our America's new establishments tend to be made with yesterday's pariahs. And we were able to withstand this stuff. And I think the slow drip of propaganda for a while and operations in the United States actually established that. I almost have to thank the FBI or CIA or whatever shadowy organization it was that has created, like, ever since the Kennedy assassination, has created this counterculture movement, which has slowly become more accepted about conspiracy theories. Like, conspiracy theorists are now an institution in America, as far as I'm concerned. And they have their own ability to police each other, which is crazy. They get new talent in, and then the new talent gets chewed up, spit out, or they become part of the established conspiracy theorists. But it was just crackpot craziness that I think saved America, that we're willing, and to be like 90%, 80%, or even just 20% wrong, but have some kernel of truth in there is kind of what saved us. Whereas I think that level of dissent just doesn't happen in continental Europe. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cultural difference thing. I mean, part of it is that we were made up of like pioneers and fringe weirdos and people deliberately looking to get away from, ordinary European society. And so that kind of informs us, because there's a self-selection bias there that's pretty strong. But yeah, Americans are generally, because of our divergence and it compounding over time. Historians talk about this all the time, how much how much Americans are a pamphleteering people, and now we're a podcasting people.
Yes.
But Americans are strongly disagreeable and very, very earnest. And these are sort of breakaway cultural values that we have. I mean, that's like the Texas A&M thing that you played earlier. Like, outside of like local festivals and stuff, like I happened to be in Barcelona during Merced, where there were like parades and floats and stuff. You see a kind of earnest celebration sometimes in Europe. You see that sort of earnest celebration, maybe not so much in the major cities, but generally in most of the United States. There is a kind of cultural earnestness, which is not normal in European civilization. There's I would say pretentious, but not just in the derogatory sense, in like the sense of there is a pretense to be, maintained, like being disaffected or like, above it sort of. That's just sort of a cultural norm.
It actually reminded me that a bit of Americana. I was riding around America on my motorcycle, and I happened to be through this town called Kennett Square, which is just a place in Pennsylvania. Fun fact: Kennett Square is where like 90% of the mushrooms in America are grown. And their Memorial Day parade was off the chain. Like, it was a huge event. There was a lot of stuff. It went on for hours, and just everybody was in it. Everybody was in it. So here's a couple of Google results of who was in it. Just a normal parade. This is just whatever the results are that come back.
Yeah.
Americans tend to reserve a lot of their pageantry and a lot of their enthusiasm for the local, which means that they can know it a little bit better. I know European nations are much smaller, so maybe it's their nationalism is more like our statism here in America. But now with the EU,
I
the
think that's
abstraction
probably
above it,
accurate. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the EU above it now has now kind of brought it out to a it's brought it out to a level that they've never had before, and they may not know how to deal with it because it'll say like, well, we should be nationalistic and EU is our nation, so let's do it. It was like, but you've never had a nation that was this far abstracted from what you've known locally, right? So now
Yeah,
they
yeah, and everything they put in that's like trying to show like a national spirit or supranational spirit is like obviously super fake and gay.
yeah, oh yeah, and anything that's genuinely nationalistic is then poo pooed
Yeah.
as being
Well, it's a tall to a certain extent, it's a tall poppy syndrome writ large.
yeah.
And this is one of the other factors that like is behind the failure to reignite of sort of vitality among European cultures. But like cultures and economies is supranational organizations are supranational governing organizations are in general a very bad idea. This applies
Yeah.
to the EU. It also applies to it also applies to the United Nations to a certain extent. Before the Civil War, it also applied to the United States. Um, and the misgivings that Southerners and other states had about the Union was this sort of supranational character to it that forced very unpleasant associations. And the United States essentially resolved that tension by destroying the separate constituent nations and replacing them with a single nation. The United
Yeah.
States is versus the United States are.
Yeah, and the
We now live in a United States is world.
yeah, and the United States is world. All the state rivalries are more or less just petty sports competitions. Now, we do get to have a lot of like actual earnest shit talk between states, which I don't know if happens in the EU, where it's like there are actual major consequences. I think the busing of migrants, illegal migrants to sanctuary cities, was probably that manifested in its most extreme. But you'll also see states pull businesses away from other states. So there's almost an economic warfare aspect, especially with Austin pulling away a lot of like a good portion of Silicon Valley, which is messing with someone else's money is a pretty big deal. Like that's not a small thing, and doing the busing of migrants to sort of call somebody on their moral grandstanding, but also just like the causing of mayhem, crime, and also economic ramifications. And genuine panic and an amount of disunity among their people. That's what I was saying before, is that the red states have kind of learned how to use these tools that the blue states have. I feel like the blue states have been playing from the CIA handbook and the destabilization handbook probably since the 60s. And now the red states have caught up and have learned very quickly. Like Japan going from a feudal kingdom to a modern power with an ironclad train system and telegraph in 25 years. The red states have had remarkable quickness. There are still, in my opinion, enemies to this quickness. Not necessarily enemies with to myself or to any political movement, but ones who are trying to go the speed limit or be principled. I think the phrase "principled conservative" has now become a derogatory term, and and libertarians have also become derogatory. Funny thing is, I'm probably most politically aligned with libertarians, but I find them to be horrendously bad because they always seem to pop up whenever the right is really like got some momentum and is smashing an enemy. So I feel like they're containment, but I don't feel like they're doing it on purpose.
They're not doing it on purpose, or at least I don't think so. I mean, here's a weird thing. Like, if you're into serious political brinksmanship internal to your country's politics, like the Republicans should be supporting the Green Party to the hilt and the Democrats and the Libertarians because it lets you sponge votes and split blocks very easily. But one of the things about the libertarians is like I think most Americans have libertarian inclinations naturally, like our personalities just run that way. The problem with the libertarians is the Libertarian Party and particularly as an organization, libertarians operate on a single moral foundation, if you believe Jonathan Haidt,
Correct. Yeah.
and they tend to do so within an organization at an ideological level. So they purity test and purity police themselves,
Yes.
which means, like, it's very important to understand libertarianism is an ideology. It is a rationalistic framework combined with an idealistic disposition. It deviates from reality very, very hard and is not possible to falsify. Libertarian instincts, a libertarian approach, perfectly fine. Libertarianism as an explicit set of beliefs, highly ideological and will always get you into trouble. I used to be a really strong libertarian.
Well, it appeals to your rationalization, right? But
exactly.
When you dig down to it, the libertarians have fundamentally a lot in common with Marxists. And I got in a lot of trouble for saying this, but they have a very utopian mindset that disregards human nature.
Yep,
I think
absolutely.
On an old account of mine, I actually said this and pissed off a bunch of libertarians. It was actually Dan Vask of who wrote the theme song for Nerdrotics, Friday Night Tights, and all that stuff. But he's got really butthurt about it. I was actually earnest too. I feel like the autistic kid who's saying the thing that he thinks is true, and then everyone's mad at me, and I don't know why. But I was like, yeah, this is very. And that was before the socialists won in Brazil, so I got the last laugh. You vote split the conservatives, and that's what you get. Up yours. Honestly, though, screw you guys. You guys are really mean to me.
Vote split the conservatives returns us back to Britain to a certain extent.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The problem with supranational organizations. Britain needed to do Brexit, but the problem, and return sovereignty to their own country. The problem is that the elites that they were returning sovereignty to were actually significantly worse than the EU technocrats. These were lower caliber people, and it just bit them in the ass.
I love how the technocrats in the EU are actually. I would love to have a technocrat round off where it's we go over the roster of technocrats, EU versus America. But I feel like the American technocrats are significantly more competent and accomplished. And I just have to look and see who's advancing technology lately. And that's where I'm getting my notion from, is that your technocrats actually suck at technology. It's why are you doing this? What they're going to do is they're going to pay an American company to create their special ID, which I haven't heard a lot about since. I don't know if anything has changed on that. The worst things tend to happen under the radar. I don't know whatever happened to their one ID. They were going to have some EU special ID that you needed for everything, and it was electronic. And anyways, they would probably ask an American company or China to make it for them. Well, they wouldn't know how to do it themselves. I don't think they would. Their elites are so shit. Another Lotus Eaters title based on a quote, I think, by the Germans, is that the English fight like lions, but they're led by donkeys. Absolutely led by donkeys. Which I think goes to why who's the financial guy from the Lotus Eaters? See how often I watch them now. Anyways, he was saying that it would be better. Yeah, that's right. It'd be better if we were under American or Russian leadership. And I'm I can't disagree with that. Your best hope right now is if you become a U.S. territory. Right now, the United States is enforcing free speech on the EU via Elon Musk. So take that as a technocrat. I was and you guys all, I would love to see a survey, a poll of what do Europeans think of Elon Musk, despite the fact that he's fighting for your freedom, which I think Americans being shat on for fighting for European freedom has become such a tradition now that it's actually probably older than at least half as old as America is at this point. With very little fanfare or thank you from it, which is why I think Americans like JD Vance so much for saying have you guys even thanked us, sort of thing, which is which has become a meme itself. It's
well, that's one of the ways in which America has made Europe weak. Is since the end of World War II, we've essentially been, as a means of fighting the Russians, the security guarantor for all these nations. They haven't had to think about a military. They haven't had to think about providing for themselves in terms of physical defense. They haven't had to think about securing their shipping lanes. They haven't had to think about securing their national energy supply. And, hats off to one of the European nations that I think can actually make it, which is France. because they had the genius of Charles de Gaulle saying like NATO's a trap, this whole US like world order is a trap, it makes us weak, we can't do it, we have to maintain a national military, we have to maintain a degree of arm's length from America, we have to maintain our own energy. Like, de Gaulle, love him or hate him, did a lot to make France capable of standing. And most of Europe just allowed itself to be made coddled and weak by U.S. protection guarantees. It's actually a massive problem for them, and it's encouraged this very servile security over success mindset. It's really not good. Like the American empire has been, I would say, uniquely bad for Europe out of all of its
100%.
satrapies.
It would actually be better if we ruled them like an actual empire would have ruled them, but they were almost like a client state to us.
Yeah.
I will have to dig it out. I'm terrible at digging stuff up like on the fly, but Lee Kuan Yew is a major leader of Singapore. This is where most of my family is actually from. Ethnically, we're sort of South Chinese Singaporean, right? Yeah, here's a decent picture of him. Oh, that's a nice young picture. That's lovely. Anyways, yeah, here we go. There are really great speeches that he gave on America, and he said exactly that. Like, this is not, and this is why I'm not terribly charitable to the Europeans, because they just lapped it up. They just it's like letting some other man pay for your house and your food and your electric bill, and then you ask yourself 30 years later, like, why am I such a piece of crap? Why can't I hold a job? I don't have any drive. I was like, well, because you let some other man pretty much provide for you. I'll have to see if I can find it, but
this is coming to me just now, and this is coming to me just now, and I've never espoused it before, and I haven't turned it over a lot. But consider that Europe went through essentially 50 years of devastation before becoming an American imperial territory.
yeah.
2 world wars in particular. How much of their male populations did these countries lose? Was it enough to totally destabilize the political preference equilibrium between the sexes and essentially create future generations of Europeans that are massively feminized? I don't know for sure, but I suspect it's very likely.
Well, let me take that idea a bit further, which is why it's fun to talk, because you got two brains working in parallel here. What happens to all those women who would have married one of those men but now can't? Well, they get into politics. That's what those women do, is they get into politics. And even there was brought forward by some of the Lotus Eaters guys too. The reason why I mention them so much is they're my view into England. Is that I think it was Sargon or something like that, or Carl Benjamin, who said that like young men need to marry these women, and every guy out there was like, no, we're not. What it's like, there's some truth to it, is that Carl is saying that these ladies who have no family and no children are actually a political blight. So what happens after World War I? What happens after World War II, right? Well, now you have all these ladies who are involved like crazy in politics, involved like crazy in education, involved like crazy in establishing the next generation of men. And
right. Essentially motherhood is off the table, but you want your life to still have some form of meaning, and you're reaching out for what's missing. So the natural thing is essentially displace that onto the body politic or onto the men of your civilization.
Yeah, and it was I have a lot of
as an aside, somebody needs to marry these blue-haired women. The US kind of has its own like high school version. Like you see the loner, like the future school shooter, and there is sometimes the internal conversation of like, girl, you got to jump on that hand grenade for the good of the whole society.
I got some really dark news for you, man. They're called Muslims. Oh, shit.
Well, okay, so that's something like that's something you can be like based Islam or whatever, but one of the realities with supranational organizations is you can never equalize upward. You can only equalize downward.
Yeah. Yep.
Forced associations in supranational legislative authorities cause everyone to descend to the least common denominator. I mean, again, like, say what you will about based Islam, but the reality is, like, Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia sit on the Women's Rights Council. Like, the Soviet Union sat on the Human Rights Council.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
when you are in forced association, and this even shows up on the individual level. I know Jonathan Haidt and others have talked about it. There was this experiment to put together like good high performing kids and like bad juvenile delinquents and like a summer camp like buddy system type thing, and the uniform outcome 100% of the time is it just made the good kids bad.
Yeah.
Supranational organizations do this to all their member states, because when you are creating a body like this that is a forced association and saying you are all of equal value, Evan Sayet talks about this in The Kindergarten of Eden. You wind up having to make an affirmative. If you are saying everybody is equal, relativism, this necessarily entails you must make the affirmative argument for evil and against good.
Yes.
The EU and the UN both do this. And like Americans felt this way in the United States our era. The abolitionists were like no union with slavers. They felt it was morally repugnant and against their conscience to be forced to associate with these people. And the resolution was go to war, demolish all these separate polities, make them one, and enforce a particular vision. In the EU, it's probably significantly easier to say, no, we're just going to leave and do our own thing, like, both barrels to you, because the Europeans don't necessarily have an equal sense of like national belonging or, like a sense of being the same with other European countries. Like the French, for all their internal regions, consider themselves the French. The Germans consider themselves Turkish. Anyways, sorry, this was, I just wanted to get the supranational thing out. But you had a Lee Kuan Yew point that I totally pulled you off of.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Yeah, the Lee Kuan Yew point was that American liberalism is extremely destructive. So he was called the dictator by the international press because he would not allow newspapers to just print whatever they wanted. He said, if you're going to say anything about me, I have a right as the leader of Singapore to put my response in that paper, and you have to publish them at the same time, which actually makes a lot of sense. But if you're a diehard freedom of speech, freedom of press person, that's like a grave sin, right? Well, he's able to maintain a one-party state for a very long time because of that, because he's more or less beloved. One of the things he says is he said we need to distance ourselves away from America as much as possible. When the English left, we had a big problem, and we need to start getting young men to be able to fight for us. The way they handle immigrants, so it's also fun because Lee Kuan Yew is like a big finger in the eye to all of the ethnic theorists of the West, because Singapore is a multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic state, multi-religious state. How do they do it? Well, they're pretty hard about it. They will distribute you population-wise so that you cannot form a critical mass of ethnic identity, and then they will basically digest you, and you will become a Singaporean. America actually does this. It's just that
used to, for sure.
We used to do this before the welfare. So I think the welfare state is responsible for things like the Somalians in Minnesota. Now, I will mention, by the way, that a lot of people are against multiculturalism. I'm not necessarily, because I think we need to zoom in a little bit more on what do you mean by that? Like, which cultures? Because Chinatown isn't hurting anybody. It's just chilling over there, serving noodles and running numbers games. Doing its illicit activity. If you need to find dried, powdered tiger's testicles, I know where to go. All right. Chinatown isn't really doing anything to anybody, though, because Chinese keep to themselves. Culturally, they are actually really good at transplanting to other places. The migrants in Europe right now, not so much, because they're way more imperialistic than the Chinese are. The Chinese are more isolationist in terms of their culture. Whereas in America, you still have communities that are fully Chinese racially. They don't speak English, and they all stick together, but they don't really hurt anybody, so no one's ever cared. Which is, by the way, how you stay off the radar. Hints to any minorities out there who are very influential. You need to stay off the people's radar. Unless you are like a fun backdrop for a movie or a fun foray in the city for lunch, if you are anything more than that, you'll become a problem. So what Singapore did was dissolved all of its minorities so that they could not form these ethnic enclaves. America, being traditionally a meritocracy, if you formed an ethnic enclave and you couldn't hack it, you just get destroyed, demolished. Like there's no Irish town. There's no Little Scotland. They got dissolved.
There's still Little Italy, and it was good, actually it was a massive source of criminal tension in the first half of the 20th century up through the middle of the 20th century, and maybe even into the 80s, dealing with Italian organized crime, because the Italians did maintain a distinct ethnic identity and a real political force that was its own parallel power structure. I think you're very much right that, like, okay, there are two solutions to to multiculturalism, as it were, and this is part of why I say America is, or at least was, an ethno state. Is one, you take all these different ethnicities and grind them down and say, you are this now.
Yes.
Like, you are all together and you have your idiosyncrasies and stuff, but in order to be tolerated here, you must be Americans or Singaporeans.
You have to be a cultural supremacist to make that work, which is why the EU is not making that work. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's shocking to me that chauvinism is a bad word now, because it's a lot of what the world is desperately missing. And like individual nations need chauvinism real bad.
Yeah.
I forget who said it, but like, you would expect the president of your country to be the biggest nationalist in your country, and it would be pretty weird if they weren't.
Yes.
The other answer to multiculturalism, and sometimes you can have both at once, is extreme authoritarianism.
Yes.
The online right is in the process of jumping all over that woman whose name is something Birbal Singh, the harshest school headmistress in the UK.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And it's interesting because what she's doing in her, like, Americans would call it a public school. It's not private. They can't select their students. It's a school in London. So they have to deal with exactly the demographics in London and the incoherence and instability that can generate. And she essentially has to do like an extreme authoritarian set of rules to get all these groups to like cooperate, or at least remove room for tension, and then melt them down and say, you are students here first. And you can maintain distinct cultures in a multicultural society, but you can't have freedom if you do.
No, you can't. Yep. Not the Western idea of freedom.
Yeah, your only other option is overarching super ethnicity, like Singaporean or American. That's it. You can't do it otherwise.
Well, the Singaporeans are like, they are very authoritative, and they do have their rules. And
well, they have to be, because they're so physically small and vulnerable. Like Real Life Lore does a really good summary of this for anyone who is not familiar with the history of Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew had to navigate a gauntlet of very bad circumstances, like losing access to resources from Malaysia, being kicked out of the Malaysian Federation, and being like a tiny city-state with no natural resources, no physical capacity for defense, no industry. And what it took was like exactly what he did. Like, I guarantee you, if you trained an AI on how to govern and then said, okay, beat Lee Kuan Yew's track record, it probably couldn't.
Dude, the guy was amazing. And I'm very proud that he's actually of the same ethnic group as me. My pride is very different than other people's pride. I think it's a bit of stolen valor to be proud of your ethnicity. Is like, oh yeah, I'm great because I'm a member of this. I'm like, no. I'm inspired. Hopefully to have much good sense, because this world is extraordinarily complicated. And if you do what the online right does, which I suspect you were alluding to, if you do what the online right does and you try to go way too puritanical, you're actually going to lose. You have to know when to give And sometimes the right answer is, hey, you know what? Let him cook. Let her cook. Let her have run an authoritarian quasi public school in London. Let's see how it goes. How can I help?
But I think there's something adjacent to this, as loath as I am to give credit. I think James Lindsay jumped the gun and was just super trigger happy with the woke right thing. But there is absolutely a phenomenon where people are purity testing in weird ways and have like either ideological commitments that aren't necessarily backed up in experience and wisdom, the basis of conservatism, but are like commitments to in-group preference and are acting in preposterous ways where it's like, okay, you are behaving like the woke did when they were ascending to power, and you're essentially going to abuse your power and overreach yourself such that your coalition is extremely fragile because of your participation in it, and it's just a mimetic cycle where you will be thrown out and someone else will do the same thing in the future. You are not breaking the wheel if you behave this way.
I'm gonna go. I have like layers of masks, and I want to go one more mask off. I agree with Lindsay on a lot of it, and I didn't before. And then I looked into what he's a terrible brander, and he needs more discipline. You rack a discipline, which is a true American, as far as I'm concerned. Someone wanted to get really famous, could champion this. Heck yeah, another drink. Could champion this. Maybe it'll be us. I don't know. One thing I noticed, by the way, is whenever I use StreamYards, the views are almost zero. When I did a test stream earlier today, it was like 2 or 3 or 4 of like, and I was like, please ignore, do not look. And I was like, StreamYards, are you getting knocked down? Are you getting knocked down? So I was all right. I'll be fixed very soon. You damn duck. Anyways, I agree with James Lindsay on this, and it'd be actually kind of funny and spicy to say the virtue, like the woke right is real. ... question mark. I think it is, because these guys who are going around like Christ is king, sort of stuff, I was like, I see what you're doing, but it's a purity test. It's a virtue signaling purity test. Because as a Christian, I would not say Christ is king if I'm compelled to do so. I would tell you to go F yourself. I would say, like, I would probably quote a scripture of like, you shouldn't be doing this in public. Like this outward show is what invites charlatans in the midst. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like one of the best.
Absolutely. Yeah, you create the criterion for ascending to aristocracy or ascending to elitehood or like social preeminence as being, this set of ideas, actions, beliefs, saying the right words, etc. But the problem with ideological criteria for, admission into the elite, is you get a lot of vulgar people and vulgarians in there that you actually don't want.
I like vulgarians.
Your criterion as being solely ideological or mostly ideological is actually weak and makes your elite weak. This is like such, because a lot of people are inclined to either be elitists or elite theorists or populist. The two are actually constantly in tension, and neither is necessarily bad. We were essentially founded by groups of people who were in tension from those two camps, but the main ideological thrust and writings that have come down to form our culture are mostly from the elitists. These elitist arguments are now being used for populism, but it's of a very different type than they abhorred. It's mostly a populism of stop fucking with us, which they also indulged in and was part of their coalition. That's where we're at now. A lot of not particularly well-read elitists tend to think, oh, populism bad, and it's like, not this kind. But it is always in tension, and if you are talking about the formation of a new elite, which we're going through right now, like, you can't just have anyone.
No, and I saw this from watching V. He's a great channel on YouTube. If you can get over his voice, which took me months to get over his voice. I just started imagining in my head that he's actually a fly, and that makes it a lot easier to forgive. Like he's just a character that's a fly. He's right though. Is that if you could just say something and espouse and profess something, and then you are the thing, then it's nothing. There's no thing there. If you could just say it. And this is why the conservatives have so many e-thoughts that like every other month they're like finding out that someone is just using it as authority. Yeah. But I think people are figuring it out. And I actually see a lot of people talking about James Lindsay and woke right in a positive sense. And that's why I want to talk about That's actually probably what got me blocked by Aaron McIntyre. Is there is American conservatism and there's European conservatism, and basing your conservatism on religious, ethnic, racial identity doesn't really fly in America for very long. It will poison your movement. However, the American conservatism of 90s Democrats, which was like meritocracy, accepting somebody if they can do the job, you know, for every Morgan Freeman in Glory, there is a oh my gosh, who played the other lieutenant? There's Morgan Freeman, and I always forget names in it. A great actor. He was in King Kong Ain't Got Nothing on Me, the guy who said that. There was characters in there that were actually bad black characters that were resisting. Snowflake was weak. He was this northern abolitionist ideological guy, and he was whimpering and pissing himself crying as a Scottish guy kicked him. And he had to grow up. There was a character that was very much a black identitarian that was very much against Morgan Freeman's character. Morgan Freeman's character was kind of the wise old fella who just wanted this thing to work and for them to achieve the glory that they wanted. It wasn't any black person could succeed. It was the people who could get on board with it. And the whites also had tons of problems. The quartermaster in that movie was a white identitarianism, and he got beaten up and told to give like proper equipment. So anybody who was with any identitarianism of whatever sort was someone who had needed to be adjusted and fixed. That was what the ideological method of that movie was. And that's what Americans, I think, feel.
Yeah, looping back to your earlier point about the U.S. Army. So one of my brothers actually went through the U.S. Army sort of around the period where woke identity politics was like very just beginning to come in. But the training and psychological like breakdown and build back up was very much like nope, you're Army.
Yes.
Like no other heuristic or characteristic matters. You are Army. One of the things they'd have them do is like put them through this like grueling exercise where they're like crawling on the ground in like awful conditions and like saying like we are all green.
Yes.
Essentially like stamping out everything that was there and imprinting you are Army. That's it.
And that's how America functions. America worships excellence. America only worships excellence. We don't care where it comes from. So when people say words like Anglo-Saxon or European identity and European heritage, it's just words. It's not identity to most Americans. Like most Americans, if you went back to England, you'd be a foreigner. You would feel like a foreigner in those lands. Yeah. Like one of the things like Americans have this, supposition that like, oh, everybody else in the country is American like me. And it's not true, but it's a protective insulative layer. The English to a certain extent, I mean, the English have like local tribalisms and stuff, but they're far removed from each other. America was founded as a country of mostly Anglos, but they were geographically disparate Anglos that didn't necessarily have a ton of contact. And like they had to smash down those identities into essentially a unified one anyways. Well, there's a fun bit
it was
about,
mostly Anglos with some Dutch, German, and Scots.
Well,
but they were like incompatible and needed an arbitrating system to govern among the Angloids.
There was a lot of compromise to make this country a country, right? And the Anglos who left, it was a self-filtering process of leaving Europe to begin with. A very special, adventurous, maybe dogmatic. There's a lot of different reasons for why people left Europe and England in particular. But then when they got here, like, how many years does it take to change a man? Like, really? Like, this place, especially if you're one of the first people to land, you've never been in a place that had nothing there before. And you are probably frightened of like, oh, this is real. I have to build a house. This isn't like building a house on my dad's estate so for me and my wife to live in. This is a house that is more or less in a completely wild area. Oh, Jebediah has found fish in a local stream. Thank God, because I've been praying nonstop for about a week that we'll find some sort of food. That sort of thing of like, oh God, all of our, like we never thought to bring this particular chemical for tanning. What are we going to do? We have to talk to the natives now. How does that change a man? Imagine if a bunch of Englishmen got on a boat, showed up in Indonesia, and then England just ceased to exist. It's like that is the Americans. Like England more or less ceased to exist for months and months on end. You can't like order anything necessarily, so people had to basically make their own identity. Like when I think
it's
of
worth
England,
remembering that this is not a distant phenomenon that we have to recall out of curiosity and to like find ourselves. This is also a distant memory that we have to reconstruct and understand because we are essentially playing for this to be a problem that we'll face again, because what you're describing is also the circumstance of the first future Martians.
right? Absolutely. And how do you maintain connection with it? That I think is going to be a big challenge. And how did England lose connection with? Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because we don't have to wonder. We have a lot of history of America losing connection with England. It was we started feeling exploited and othered. Which England has a bit of a habit of doing this because they'll say that with one hand, like with one out of one side of their mouth, they'll say that, well, the Americans, they're English, they're Anglo-Saxon, and then the other side of their mouth, they're saying you're a bunch of foreigners and you're different and you're other and you're weird and the things you do are wrong and uncouth and unrefined. It's like you're one of us, also you're not enough, and eventually that's just like do that with a family. It's like a kid who finally left home was like, I'm so happy to move out. I lived in a rat-infested hellhole for years, and then I built it up, and then I get a letter from Mumsy, like mom saying, like, you're one of us. I was like, I left you guys. Like, we're gone. Where's the gifts? Where's the supplies? The French gave us a statue. What'd you guys give us?
Yeah.
Except for a bunch of wars.
It's predictable that this will happen again, because it happens consistently without fail. And I think, our cultural anticipation and imagination is also primed for it to happen again. Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, The Expanse, Moon is the Harsh Mistress. Like,
yeah.
These stories don't come out of nowhere.
I think it takes a lot of intention and a lot of work for a mother country to stay the mother country without losing its colonies. And that is a constant sense of belonging. Like not othering your colonies is a pretty good start. And right now Americans are really othered. I think if you were to say like the wording from the EU and England is pretty harsh, and I don't think a lot of their politicians realize that whatever they say about Trump is what they say about the majority of Americans now. Say like insulting him is insulting America. Because even if you didn't vote for the guy, there's a certain sense that he's the president, unless you're a full-on leftist separatist. It's kind of like a family where everyone sort of fights each other, but then as soon as the little brother gets picked on by someone from another school, like from another family, everyone comes and is like, you know what? You can't say that. You can't say that to my, president or whoever.
Well, they're deep in fuck around territory, and the find out is going to be very funny, because like Europeans, like aside from like Western Europeans, not necessarily Eastern Europeans as much, but Western Europeans live in a world that was entirely securitized by America. They have not experienced consequences in a very long time, and they're fucking around as hard as they can because they've never had to find out in generations.
No, they didn't have a Vietnam. America's Vietnam tore this country apart. I don't think people realize that. Which is why a lot of boomers were kind of unconcerned about the BLM riots. It's like, oh yeah, we've seen this before.
So here's the thing about Vietnam. I'll take a slight disagree on this.
Oh yeah, sure.
The war itself did not tear us apart. However, the movement in elite culture and the progression in media and also domestic information warfare that we call the Vietnam War, not the actual fighting, is what tore us apart. The actual fighting was by and large successful, but it was the information war that we waged on ourselves that caused us to lose.
No, we absolutely. No, I agree. And I will clarify and then slightly disagree, which is me doing the 3-point turn out of the parking lot. I think the war was significant because everybody seemed to. I've only going off of documentaries I've seen. Everybody sort of knew somebody who's either been there or was killed there, and that does have a big personal effect on the people. However, I will agree that we could have won that war easily if we had just pulled out of the stops. And the Tet Offensive was a disaster for the Vietnamese, but it was pretty much the news media screwing up Walter Cronkite. I think was a lot to blame. I don't know. I guess they just didn't. It was like the Heath Ledger's Joker. Things didn't quite go to plan, and everybody freaked out. You know what I mean? Like the Tet Offensive was supposed to be a time of like, no news is supposed to happen. We can take a week off from the war. Oh no, it's back. It's kind of like having a domestic, like a minor dispute with your spouse over Christmas. It just seems way worse. Like you were expecting things to be peaceful, and then it just wasn't, and that made it 10 times worse. So yeah, but I will also add that Europe is not immune to that level of civilization splitting disagreement. They might all say, "Hey, let's go in on Ukraine," and then they start really committing people to it, and really committing their money to it, and then really seeing the effects of it. And then they'll find out how like they'll be looking once they lose enough stuff, they'll be looking for someone to blame, and it'll probably be internal at some point.
Maybe.
God help 'em.
I mean, it's external right now. It's blame the USA, and we can just look back and say, like, what are you going to do?
Right. Well, the thing is, the USA and the USA has been theirs to blame for a long time. And once we actually pull out, like, I made this analogy to my wife, is that the United States is like the dad who's like a plumber, and he comes home and he gets berated by his daughter who is studying for AP tests, and his mom who's just a stay-at-home mom, and the son and the son is over in the video, is playing video games, is completely disconnected from the family. But these two henpecking ladies are just berating this plumber. At some point, the plumber's just be like, you know what, screw it, I'm leaving. I'm not paying for this. I'm not protecting this. And they're going to have one cold night alone where the electricity finally turns off. And then they can blame the man who left, but eventually the daughter's going to turn to the mom and say, why'd you treat him so bad? I was like, well, things were fine before you came along, and just the internal struggle is going to happen. It will redefine, like Vietnam. Sorry, I just wanted to say the Vietnam War really redefined the American identity, I think. So what will happen to Europe's identity?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm a believer in Schopenhauer's distinction, basically that there are two types of people, mystics and ascetics. I mostly fall like psychologically on the ascetic side, but I do have a couple of mystic impulses, one of which is contemplating Oswald Spengler. And he's super mystical in most regards, and like you only take him with a grain of salt. Like any theory of history is true as long as you omit sufficient evidence. But Spengler has these uncanny things that he says that really are like, wow, this came to you in a moment of like wild intuition, but I think you're dead on the money. Is the West is going under, it is going to die. And for him, the West was particularly like very much centered in Germany because he's German. But the cultural symbols he chose to describe it are semi-alien to the Anglos. But the West that Spengler described is 100% going to die. And what he talks about in Decline of the West is like, actually, the next great future civilization is the Russian civilization. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. It was probably retarded by communism, like essentially suppressed from going anywhere. But I just look around at the state of degeneracy of the EU and how fallen apart they are. And like, if the US, like, because we also fucked Russia hard in the fall of the USSR, like economically destabilized them and like auctioned off their country.
Yes.
They were coming out of it, and like we kicked them while they were down. But if the US begins to re-normalize relationships with Russia and enables Russia to like really get on its feet and be a participant in the world, I think what you are likely to see actually is, the rise of a sort of Spenglerian Russia. And, one of the commentaries on it is like Russia doesn't really have like a coherent culture right now. It is in many cases force of arms, and that's because one, it was culturally retired by the Soviet Union, and then two, massively destabilized by the US. When they put themselves back on their feet, as they're starting to do, like you are probably going to see the next world force. So that's my like mystic indulgence right there. And like honestly, looking at the EU guys like all crowding around Zelensky in their little chairs like they're in a high school group project.
Yeah.
I saw that photo. I'm like, it's so fucking over. You
Yeah,
guys
exactly.
don't matter anymore. Like, I literally don't care what happens. Like, it's not that I don't care what happens to Europe. I have many great European friends. The country is beautiful. The cultures are fantastic, particularly our past heritage. But like, you guys don't matter anymore. Like
No, they don't.
politically,
No.
inconsequential. Don't
And with
care.
my I'm going to call it my fleeing nobles theory of the EU is that most of the EU was built by nobles that are just no longer there, and I think that there were a distinct ethnic group from the people who are there now, considering the intermarriage between the classes was just not a thing. So they're kind of like the children who are abandoned by their parents, or the parents died, and they're like trying to run a house and they just don't know how anything works, and they're doing their
This is
best
like a
to.
low key, more realistic Tartarian theory.
Oh, I don't know Tartarian theory.
Oh, it's the idea that all these like grand buildings and architecture and like high civilization and stuff was built by a lost kingdom called the Tartarian civilization. It's fake. It's like flat Earth. It's mostly online trolling.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it is
absolutely.
essentially the Germans, like the ancient Germanic people's experience of Roman buildings. Like, wow, these
Yeah.
must have been built by giants, kind of thing.
Well, we use mythology to try and because mythology is new. We invent it as we go along, and things that are new have more life to us because it becomes an extension of us. I can contribute to a Tartarian theory, or I could at least read the book as it comes out if someone wrote a book on it. But mythology is used to help explain things that we can't explain. I'm actually a humongous mystic in terms of, well, I think I am. I guess we'll find out. I'll let you be the judge. But I tend to not care about the truth of the matter. I think that things are all strung with narratives, and whatever narrative is very helpful for you to understand something, you should go with that. It speaks to me being an engineer rather than a scientist. I care about what works more than what is 100% absolutely true. So if there's like footnotes I need to erase or like paragraphs I need to omit to make the story work, because I don't really care about the history for the sake of history. I care about the history for the sake of understanding a narrative that is applicable to me, which is why I think historians tend to be so confused as to the present day so much. They have to like ad hoc re-justify why stuff is happening. I find them, but they can't predict the future. They'll say that Trump is Caesar all they want. And I pointed out that Caesar put Gauls in the Senate and was extremely reliant on engineers to accomplish his greatest feats. So I was like, yeah, it's not going to work out. It's not great for you. Like if Trump is Caesar, that's bad news for you because you're just another guy on the Senate.
Yeah. If anything, Trump is almost more of a Cato figure.
I wouldn't even. Yeah, I don't know my history that well, so.
So there is an interesting historian / philosopher you might enjoy in what you described. Guy by the name of Eric Voegelin. By the way, this is like when James Lindsay gets particularly esoteric. I was there following on Twitter when it happened in real time that he first got to Voegelin.
Yeah.
2 books, probably best entry points: New Science of Politics or Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. Voegelin is mostly concerned with understanding cultures and civilizations from their own perspective and from their particular metaphysical constitution of the world and these grander meta narratives. So he rarely does judgment. He is mostly focused on reconstructing them and then extracting structural ideas that they have or innovate. This results in being very interested in the progression of Gnosticism as a religious movement that reemerges periodically in European civilizations. But yeah, historian probably right up your alley. New Science of Politics and Science, Politics, and Gnosticism are both very accessible introductions.
Okay, I'll check that out. Yeah, like the right now, I'm what I'm concerned about with America is that we will just to sort of wrap up my disdain. I have to have it. I actually like Europe, but I have to have disdain for the self-interest of my own country, which is a weird place to be
we
in.
also do just as a matter of like national character. We wouldn't be Americans if we weren't giving them both barrels, when the opportunity presented itself.
Absolutely, we should. Yeah, exactly. The problem I see with the big C conservatives who want to become more like Europe and have all of these European trappings for how their civilization emerged, I think those civilizational trappings were a product of their time. I don't see a reason why that has to be this way. Like, this ethnic group had to be there and then dominate. I'm not making content at the moment other than these live streams. One of the pieces of content I want to make is actual mathematical proof that if you were the majority population, you should stop worrying about minority populations taking your high-end jobs, because the very top end of the bell curve is going to find a much larger marriage pool inside of the majority if you can maintain the majorities, like, unless you always all regress into a bunch of like apes or something and they become some super, which is not going to happen typically. Americans are pretty well spread out. So having like minorities come to America is not that ethnically destructive as they make it out to be, because they tend to intermarry and you get to poach the best. This happens a lot with American blacks, is that black men who are doing really well tend to marry white, and then black women hate it. Black women who are doing really well tend to marry white. Mm-hmm. And then everyone says "you go girl" or "yes queen." That's just a cultural thing they have.
I mean, I think the American circumstance, like America is very good at dealing with immigration and stuff like that, and
Yes.
managing like elite assimilation, general assimilation, etc. It's just like the border crisis stuff, like. I don't think anyone actually like disagrees that immigration can be very good. It's just a question of volume and time frames.
And like, the general quality of,
anything is a poison in a high enough dose. Like you must quality control.
Absolutely, you must quality control, and you have to put the same rules on them, or worse. Actually, it's actually better to have harsher rules to see that anyone who makes it has to make the gauntlet, which is why military service is typically considered an acceptable path to citizenship, because just the pure gauntlet they have to go through to get there. Which is funny, because a lot of like Europeans will say like, oh, they're going to send more white boys to fight their wars. I was like, have you looked at the makeup of the military? It's very disproportionately minority. A lot of it. I'll have to go find some data to back that up. But like the idea that America sends its white boys to fight its wars. First off, our white boys send our white boys to fight our wars. They enlist voluntarily because they like it.
We mostly send Appalachians and Southerners into the Army and Marines, and then we send flyover state kids into the Navy.
Yeah, and then you send like anybody who wants a career in politics to the Air Force. Just kidding.
Fun fact: almost all Navy admirals come from landlocked states,
which is funny.
Yeah.
Maybe. So what's actually good for America is toxic to Europe and vice versa, which I think I'll probably bring this all up on the live call with if I can make it to one with the Lotus Series, because I want to see what they think before I really run with it. But I think that our civilizations actually have, like, our blood is their poison is our blood.
We're the dreaded alkaline based life form.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Like so if we have normalized relations with each other, we're going to destroy each other without thinking of it, because their elites might try to be Americans, which is what they're trying to do right now.
Yeah. I mean, as loathsome as this can be for some conservatives to hear, like, this is actually the point of liberalism, is allowing incompatible systems to interface beyond superficial trade, but to achieve some level of interoperation within one another's territories, and have a system of dispute resolution that enables that. It turns out it is ultimately corrosive, because it facilitates massive cultural transfusion, between incompatible peoples. But, like, this is literally what the system was built for.
Well, and the thing is, here's the American thing. This is where I tend to mythologically disagree with most conservatives, is that I don't believe that America is supposed to maintain homeostasis. I think it is supposed to constantly transform based on a meritocracy. So if there's a transfusion of cultures and it's good, it's more effective, then you should do it. And I think actually the New World could probably use an infusion of like clan-like family structures that is just not there in Europe anymore. Which is there in other cultures. Like my family is very clan-like, in that if I really wanted to buy a house and I didn't want to have a mortgage, I could probably ask enough questions to not do it. But I got a sweet rate at like 2.25%, so I'm good.
Wow.
But like my down payment, I didn't have to pay it because my brother chipped in, and then then I paid him back, and then so like people complain about banks. It's like, how big is your family? Like, if I really had to, I could reach out to family that's in the Netherlands and then Singapore and then Jakarta. And it's like, why don't you guys have families like that? Someone in your family is really rich, and you should really like that person. They should really like you, and you wouldn't have a lot of problems. But you're all
Yeah,
very
that's.
atomized, you know.
I mean, that could be its own like whole discussion.
Yes,
Is
absolutely, yes.
that American civilization is massively overly financialized, and that definitely is connected to the breakdown of the extended family structure. Part of it's
Yeah,
unique American characteristics. Part of it's that we don't have the same cultural aversion to usury that's actually defined Europe for like 1700 years.
well,
And our
yeah,
relationship to banking and money is culturally very different from theirs. But like you're right, we need, not to the insane level of like Ethiopia or Eritrea, but like we need clans back, in a
yeah,
certain limited, distinctly American way, because we have to solve our financialization problem.
true. And then we're running on to time here, so I'll start to just wrap this up. Is that where America is going to go in the future? I don't believe is in the past. So I don't believe that conservatives can have a comprehensive vision of the future, but they have a good vision of the past, and I think that's going to be 80% of what we need, which is why conservatives seem to be leading change. However, what's going to happen when you have liberals now in charge of the conservative, like the liberals have become the elites of the conservative movement, which is to me very funny. Liberals like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Kash Patel and basically everyone who actually has any power. Someone told me that Eli Vance is a paleo conservative. I was like, he's a practicing Catholic, but other than that, he doesn't. And I pointed out that he's married to an Indian woman. He's like, he has no problem. He's not like trying to keep it in the race. You know what I mean? He doesn't. He went to Yale for God's sake. He produced a book and I think a movie, or like he was involved in that. Like he's not.
I don't know about the movie, but I have read the book. Yeah, yeah. I did not get paleo conservative from Hillbilly Elegy.
He probably has more I mean, I haven't read it, but he probably has more criticisms of Americana and because from what he's been through. Because yeah, Americans actually have a lot of problems that like this sort of white identitarian Americans. They've been a laughing stock for a long time because most of the like white supremacists in America are like living in trailers. I'm like, that's not untrue. Like they're not successful. They're not successful in business necessarily very much. Like I think Torba is the most. There's Andrew Torba who has Gab. Is Notch a paleo conservative? You get these sort of niche people that pop up, but most of the time everyone's kind of okay with cooperating with others. However, that is poisonous to the Europeans. Like they don't. It feels wrong to them, and it degrades their sentiment towards their nation, which means they're less willing to fight for it. Which means ultimately they're going to fail. Whereas Americans are so much more mercenary. It's like a bunch of pirates that met in Tortuga and are about to sail off to make a fortune together. Is way more the
Yep.
the sentiment. Anyways, do you have any? I'm going to let you have the last word. I think. Do you have any closing statements on European and America here?
Closing thoughts on Europeans and America.
Yeah. What?
No, other than just like, man, that new superpower being born is like copium of the highest order.
Oh Jesus God!
Oh
Yeah.
no, I guess there is a closing thought.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Uh, I would say that any given European nation that pursues its own path, and does so with an unabashed love of their own culture, their own particular way, and even if it is incorporative, as I think is it is in the most likely candidate, they are, you know, they actually have pretty good odds of success. The trouble is, to be capable of doing it, they need to be out of the EU. Britain got out of the
Yeah.
EU and exposed its own problems, namely that they were overrun with incompetent people because they had allowed weakness to fester as a result of the securitized American world. They just became fools. And like of all the ones, like if they could go their own way, I think France could probably do it. They've got their own securitized foolishness, but at least they still have a good level of chauvinism in them, and they do have a still somewhat independent spirit, or at least the material artifacts of a one-time independent spirit in terms of like their nuclear power, and they're still having a real military and stuff like that. From the foresight of De Gaulle. I
Right,
think
right.
France could do it if they got shut of the EU, but honestly, I think any one of them can do it as long as they're not with the EU anymore and they are very serious about being themselves.
Based on your research, and I'll direct this last question here. Based on your research, is it looking better for them if the Americans sort of depower the secret security state? Because we're at a small, like a minor civil scuffle. I'm going to say it not a war, but a scuffle with our own intelligence state. Will that allow the EU to run free? Maybe. What do you think they'll? Do you think they'll take it? Do you think they'll? Let's say the CIA and all of clandestine operations of America just cease to exist tomorrow. I wonder what that would look like. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think if they cease tomorrow in sort of geological time, then the EU ceases to exist in the next week and a half. Because all their
100%
it's like I said earlier, all their ideas, all their leaders are ideas and leaders that are specifically calculated to ruin your country, to keep it weak and manipulable. Reality has to reassert itself, and if people are dealing with real material conditions, that shit's not going to last. If the pipeline of money that keeps that shit going is gone, like, you're going to get real leaders again.
Yeah, the return to meritocracy might force them to shuffle the best up. One other quick idea I had a long time ago was that a lot of people who were tired of the EU left to go to America or left to go pursue their fortunes elsewhere. I wonder if you'd ever have a repatriatization movement, if that would actually help the EU build back up. Like, what do you think?
It's possible. I mean, that's a good test if they're actually doing what it takes to be successful again and not just be in managed decline mode forever. We can I think as other countries exit, you can probably watch that and see it happen. And it's not just America, by the way. Actually, I think the real test of a country that exited the EU is watch and see if Britons start returning from Australia. Because that's been their main go back, get the fuck out of here country, especially for a lot of their technical elites, particularly in medicine. When you see the Australians coming back, you'll know that England is healing.
Interesting thought. Yeah. All right. I'm going to leave it there. I'm dying of the flu. I will say that the whiskey did, in fact, get me through 2 hours. I didn't think it would.
Yeah, congratulations for hanging in there.
Evan Williams is the wind beneath my wings. I'm going to end it there. Alex, you just stay on for 5 minutes after we end to plan the next one. And I will see all of you later. Have a blessed one. Bye-bye.